Good afternoon. We are going to call the regular meeting for the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority to order at 2:03 p.m. For our roll call, I will note that Commissioners Anderson, Babbitts, Paulson, and Babbitts and Fox are in the room, and Commissioners Keithler and I do not know who's doing it. Is Doug Gibson online? Not seeing him. Okay, so we have one missing from Washington. Okay, and then we have alternate Gilchrist is online and will be sitting in for Commissioner Gibson. And then we also have in the room Commissioner alternate Wilson, alternate Thomas is online, and is Nathan online? Yeah. Yep, Nathan is online. Oh, all right. I said Commissioner or alternate Edwards. Yeah. Okay. Next up, we also have, do we have our new council online who would like to introduce themselves?
Yes, good afternoon. It's Judy Verone from the Dakotas Law Firm. I'm anticipating that Mark Greenow will be joining us from Foster Garvey.
And it looks like our Foster Garvey representative just joined. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Pardon?
Would you like to introduce yourself, Mark?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mark Greenow with the law firm of Foster Garvey in Seattle, and we have been appointed along with the Dakotas firm in New Jersey, general counsel to the Bridge Authority, and we're thrilled to join the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Judy. Next up, we will move into the agenda. Is there any modifications to the business agenda that any of the commissioners would like to mention? Hearing none, I'd take a motion to approve the agenda. There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, motion carries. Okay, next up, we will move into public comment. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Is there anyone from the public who would like to provide public comment to the board? If you're in the room, please come up to the podium. If you're online, please raise your hand, *6 to unmute yourself, wave your hands, get our attention. Apparently everyone is excited about the toll increase and don't want to talk to us about it. Is there anyone who would like to provide public comment to the board? Going twice. One last chance for public comment. Hearing none, we will close public comment and move into the executive reports, the co-chair's report. I will report that we are currently working through our IGA or intergovernmental agreements. Right now, we are working on the funding section, both for the funding of our portion of the bridge toll increase or all of the bridge toll increase, as well as a potential for a $500,000 loan from the Port of Hood River that would cover all of our expenses that are not reimbursable through grants. That's primarily lobbying, travel to DC, and that sort of thing. Hopefully we'll have something to go to the rest of the board here in the next week or two. And we're currently, Commissioner Fox and I had a meeting with the port director as well as the head of the port commission earlier today working on that. And I've a good sense of confidence that we'll come to a really good understanding on that. With that, Commissioner Fox.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of things last week. The first one is that the team submitted the mega grant application back to DC. I in fact took the time to read it cover to cover, and I can tell you it was a very impressive document. And I congratulate the HNTB team for doing it. I think we've got a pretty good chance. I think the document is rock solid, but time will tell. The other thing that I personally was involved in is discussion with Summit Strategies as far as looking at replacing Hal, who is our lead lobbyist in the DC. We had a Kiewit check-in, and lastly, well, the Yakima Nation came in that I think Mike will probably talk about a little later on. It was a very good meeting.
Any questions?
Yes, how much are we applying for in the mega grant?
It's $200 million.
So I was listening on the radio today, they were saying that Coos Bay has applied for 800 million in mega. Does that in any way, do we have any clue as to how our application plays with theirs? Apparently they previously applied for 1.2 and this is their second time around also.
I don't. Again, it's a kind of a total different grant.
Yep.
Different project totally. Personally, I think we're very well positioned. It's a pretty simple project. What Coos Bay is doing is extremely complicated and will be a mega project, multi-years.
And so we're not just applying for the mega, we're applying for infra, anything we can try to get our hands on. Okay, next up, Project Director Bridge Update Report.
Yes, all right, the .gov site, we have everything in place now. We're just getting the background on getting the .gov site up and running. It will be the authority's primary site, and then the project site that we currently have will be a kind of a sub-site or spin-off of that site, as you'll go to projects and then you'll go to the project site. They're in the process of getting that set up. We're also working on the .gov emails, so we hopefully will have those, if not by the end of this week, early next week, we'll have everybody's .gov emails set up. There's just some little nuances with the .gov site that don't exist with the normal site, so there's a little more to do that there instead of just generally how you would do a website. So the Joint Transportation Commission, they are coming out on actually it's the Tuesday, September 26th through Thursday, September 28th. They will be here at the project from 12:30 to 3 on September 27th. But that also includes a lunch and some other presentations. I think we have about 30 to 45 minutes at that presentation. We'll need to finalize our talking points and presentation, but also need to know who would like to attend that event so that we can make sure we get head count to them on who will be attending. So just something that's coming up here in a couple weeks. Commissioner Fox talked about the MPDG grants that we submitted. The Treaty Tribe MOAs, just real quickly on that, the Yakima Nation did come out. There was about 10 members of the Yakima Nation that came out, including 2 other councilmen. Very good conversation. We spent about 3 hours with them. We were actually over here, went through the Section 106 MOA, I think got some things resolved. FHWA gave them some reassurance, which included a letter to all of the treaty tribes stating that we would that they were committing to not moving forward with the ROD until all of the parts were done. We reassured them that that was kind of our same feeling as well. That was meaningful to them. It was also, I think, very meaningful that the Bridge Authority is now an agency, and there's not this unknown space of who's actually going to be responsible for commitments that are being made to them. So that went well. We also then did a field trip down to the TFAS site, the Treaty Fishing Access Site, here on the Washington side, and walked out on the dock, kind of showed them the perspective of where the bridge would be in relationship to that site, talked about the fact that we're not going to be impacting that site. And then we went over to the Oregon side, met with them over there. They got chucked to the geotechs who are doing some of the boring, look at some of the borings, go through and talk to them about some of the stuff we found in one of the borings on the Oregon side, and, you know, the process we followed to make sure everybody was notified of that. I think they were very appreciative of that as well. And then we walked out to the Oregon side and looked at the bridge kind of perspective from the Oregon side, talked about the area that we would be wanting to use as a safety zone. They seemed to be very receptive of that. I think had really good conversations with them. Their new legal counsel was there and participated. He seemed to be, very excited to get onto the project and get this moving forward. So overall, I think it was a really good meeting. I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add.
I agree. We were told later that all the key members from the Yakima Nation from the various divisions were in attendance, and that was a very good sign.
Yeah, it was natural resources. There are cultural resources, there are fisheries, 2 folks from their fisheries, and then 3 of their legal counsel were there. So it was a very good attendance from the Yakima Nation at the meeting. So. Nez Perce, we need to follow up, or I need to follow up with Nez Perce. They had a meeting on the 22nd of last week where they were presenting their edits to the MOA to their executive committee. So I'll get a feedback from their legal counsel and see how that went and whether she can send us then the MOA back, and then we can kind of start the next phase with Nez Perce. So that was a good meeting with them. And then we have a meeting with Umatilla at their facility in Pendleton, September 12th. Warm Springs, we're still working with them to set up the next meeting. We don't have another meeting with Warm Springs yet. Legal counsel engagement letter. You met our legal counsel just a few minutes ago. We're engaged. They've got their letters signed now, and we'll talk a little later about their activities, upcoming activities. To move the Washington agreement for funding forward, we needed to apply for a Washington vendor number. So I worked with Debbie. She made some edits last week and resent that to them. That allows us just to be a vendor and payee to Washington because the new authority didn't have one. Once that's done, then they can add that into the agreement, and then we should be seeing a draft agreement. I would say the end of this week, early next week. They said it was about a 5-day process for them to set that number up once they got all the final paperwork that they needed. So hopefully that'll move us forward then of getting the $5 million of 15 of state funds from Washington and having access to that. So the biological opinion, we right now had a very positive meeting with ODOT. They were supposed to send all of the what their final version was to NIMS at the end of last week. I have not heard that they did not. I sent an email to the gentleman. He said, if you don't hear anything, it went. So I'm counting that it went. He will be back in the morning. I sent him an email today just confirming that he's out of town until tomorrow. What that means for us though, is if that moves it out of ODOT's court and sends it to NIMS, which then becomes an FHWA oversight. So then the FHWA folks can get involved and start coordinating with NIMS to help move that forward. So that's a big step. I think that just means we're getting closer to actually really getting the biological opinion at this point. So typically their review time is 45 to 60 days. So we'll see. But given that they've used this, they aren't really under that constraint because they've spent that time already. So we're hoping that turnaround will be even quicker. So, all right. We do have some in-state travel coming up, and based on our policy that we did last week, our last meeting, just wanted to make everyone aware. There's the IBTTA conference that's October 7th to October 10th in Seattle. I think Commissioner Fox is planning to attend that. I don't know if anybody else was planning to. I think he's the only one registered at this point. So if anyone else would like to attend, let us know. I'm sorry, International Bridge, Tunnel, and Tolling Association. All right. It's bridges, tunnels, and tolling. That's the key parts, which we fit everything but the tunnel part. So, and then I'm gonna mess this one up too. The Pacific Northwest Waterways Association.
That's correct.
Their annual convention is October 11th and 12th. They've asked us to come down and do a presentation on the project and an update. So we'll be doing that. It's in Vancouver, so it'll be probably just a day trip, but just to be aware that people will be going. And then, as I said, the Umatilla, and this was the reason we put Idaho in. No, sorry, that was Nez Perce. Umatilla will be going over to their place and meeting with them, but that's here in Oregon, so the week after next, yeah. All right, that is it for,
I have no real burning desire to go the IBBTA XRT. But if somebody else would like to cover it for us, I'd be more than happy to give up that spot.
Mike, I had a question on that conference. Do we have any idea if any representatives from the Build America Bureau or any other group out of the DOT will be present? And would it be beneficial to try to arrange meetings with any of those on-site members?
There's a star. There we go. Look at that. Hi, folks. Kerry Witt with HNTV. And yeah, I would say it's unlikely that at least leadership from Build America Bureau would be there. It's not out of the question. I would expect perhaps some lower level staff people to be there. And about 4 weeks out, we start getting pre-registration lists, and we'll know exactly who's attending, and we keep track of who's registering. I'd also just take this opportunity to encourage any commissioners and staff to have this meeting in your backyard and this close. I think you attend once and you will want to attend again. This is your peers in the toll financed transportation industry. There's a lot of networking that goes on, and it's worthwhile.
So if we were interested in attending, what's the best process? Follow up with Mike directly, or what's recommended?
yeah. If you just follow up with me and let me know, we'll work on getting you registered.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and Debbie just pointed out that WashDOT is the host agency this year for it, so it is a good event. There's a lot of people that are worth talking to and meeting with at that event, so. Seattle.
Did somebody else have their hand up over here? Okay. What about budget report? Okay. We will move on to our committee reports. We will start with an engineering update from Mike.
Yeah, during the last period, Eric, Catherine, and myself sat through an RFP working team meeting. We provided some input on the development of the RFP, and Eric, would you like to make any comments on it?
I think I was impressed with how much layout was actually done, and the HNTB team really having a format for the document and just kind of isolating the items that we needed to talk about. I thought that was helpful. And I think there were still a few things that are hanging out there that we're still kind of digesting a little bit before we make some sort of decision. So looks like it's in pretty good shape for late October to me.
Catherine, do you have any input that you'd like to share? You're probably on mute.
Sorry, I'm doing pickup at the bus. My kids just getting off the bus. I really learned a lot about the project and the actual amount of work it's going to take, and that was really exciting.
Yeah, so just one last comment. This is going to be a pretty healthy document. It's, I believe, 3 volumes, 3 3-ring binders worth of requirements and information and so on. So it's definitely a major procurement.
One follow-up on that, we are going out September 6th for industry review and agency review. So it'll be out for roughly 3 weeks for their review. At the end of that 3 weeks, we'll be doing some one-on-one meetings with industry that sends us back comments, or agencies that send back comments. So we've got a compiled list of who we'll be sending it to, but we're going to try to hit everybody that was at the one-on-one meetings or anyone who has contacted us about the project, just to make sure, industry is attracted to the project, is aware of what we're going to have in there, and gives them a view of the contract language and the types of things we're going to be asking for. So that should be very informative as well for the project.
Next up, we'll go to our governance update. Commissioner Babbitts.
This will be relatively simple. We have not yet had a meeting. The first thing on our list is basically to work on the bylaws, and we'll be talking in a couple of minutes on the legal priorities. But basically, we are currently functioning, so we're not in a rush to change all of that. We have a functional set of rules now. We can just keep with those. So there's no emergency or crisis in place. So we can just delay that discussion until we get to the legal priority, which is a couple of items down.
And communications update, Keith, Marla.
Hi, guys. If the JLA team wants to jump in too, feel free. But I think one key update, which may not have been mentioned at the last meeting, but I realized I wasn't at the last meeting, is the funding widget, which is now live up on our website. This is something that the JLA team worked, extensively on, and we're glad to have out there. This is a good way for the public, but also commissioners. If you are having a meeting or conversation, need a quick reference, you can go to our website /about, and there you will see a breakdown of the committed funding, the percentage that we're at, where that funding is coming from. And so we're just trying to give that information a bit more transparency to everyone. You should be receiving the regular media reports and updates. And if you haven't seen the toll rate video, it is up on the website. And even though we didn't have any comments today, I think we've all received a few comments that have come into the port, and I expect we'll see more. But just reminding everyone, for people who might be frustrated about the toll, just that a good resource for information on why that is occurring would be our website as well. I don't know if JLA wants to speak to some of the planned events, but we're continuing with outreach into our communities this fall, both sides of the river. And I think the invite is out for any and all commissioners to come to any of those, between Huckfest and farmers markets up in Odell and a few other functions. Jess or Anna, are you guys on? Sorry, it's hard to see on Zoom who all is here, but if either of you want to jump in and add anything, feel free.
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Pickle. And yeah, all of those were updates that I had in mind, Marla. I'll also just add that we have a few focuses for the remainder of the summer and early fall. And so we're going to continue to focus on introducing the Bridge Authority. And so some of those activities include today's picnic, where we'll be pulling each of you aside to interview you so we can start to do social media posts and brief videos to just let the public know who you are and what your goals are for being on the authority. We also are going to make sure that we're providing a lot of updates to media about who you all are and how they can ask questions, because I think that some of the questions that we've been getting from the public when we're out at community events is, who's on the authority? What is their charge? I don't know who these folks are, or like, is this different than the way it was before? So I think that the more that we can get out into the community, the better. And so one of the things that we've been talking about with Marla is maybe doing some pop-up events, possibly in October. I think we had talked about maybe Thursdays. We're going to need to check with all of your schedules. But we were thinking of just informal, like people can swing by, ask any questions that they might have, so that they have an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, but also you can, kind of speak to the project directly. We are also going to be continuing to provide project updates about the bridge replacement. So we are currently, finishing up some geotechnical work stories. We're going to have the aesthetics committee start up soon. So we're going to start talking to the public about what does that mean? What is their charge? They're not necessarily decision makers, but here's how they can inform the process. And also just continue to address questions that the public have through some of those community events that Marla asked or brought up. Excuse me. It's been a long Monday already. And so while we're at these community events, we've been hearing a couple of things that have come up, such as like, is this actually going to happen? Or how do the new toll increases actually fit into the funding? And just there's a lot of really, also, is the new bridge going to be told once it's completed? So some of these questions that we're getting at these pop-up events is really informative to us. And it's just, we realize they're great opportunities for us to continue to just educate the public on what it is that we're doing, what is our charge. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is we're going to do, instead of switching or having the like monthly fact sheets that we've been doing, we're going to do quarterly e-newsletters that go out to over 1,000 community members and the media about what it is that we're doing. But we're posting on social media weekly, multiple times a week, and on the website. So if you have anybody who has any questions or concerns about the project, just direct them to our social media or to the website, which is hoodriverbridge.org. You should all be going there on a regular basis. And I think that those are the biggies that I've got. Anna, did I miss anything? All right. I think that's it for communications. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Marla. Okay, next up, we're going to move on to the approval, new business for our minutes from 8/14/23. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Okay, is there any changes? Any names misspelled? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Yes, so moved.
Second.
To approve the motion.
There is a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Marla. All right, next up, we will move to discussion on electronic devices for the Bridge Authority, commissioners and alternates. Mike.
So yes, so following up the meeting last week and following up on the public records, public meeting training, there was a question raised about whether we could look at or entertain the board getting some kind of electronic device so people do not have to use their home computers or business computers or those types of things. And just wanted to bring it up for discussion. Seth, I don't know if you want to add anything. But just wanted to make sure there was some discussion around this topic and direction on where you would like the staff to go with that.
Yeah, thanks for adding this to the agenda and giving me an opportunity to chat about it. Essentially, after the meeting that we had last time, 2 weeks ago, I kind of came to realize the level of exposure that using a personal device or a corporate device from my employer kind of puts my family and my employer under. And given the nature of the work, I anticipate that there will be public records requests around the bridge. There's a lot of money, a lot of people invested, a lot of moving parts. And I wanted to discuss with the board the possibility of providing commissioners, alternates, myself, with a way to physically separate the work that I'm doing for this commission versus the work that I do professionally and personally. So I didn't make any proposals of what that might look like. I didn't know if there were contractors involved that would handle this kind of thing. I'm happy to do some legwork to investigate if that's what the board wants to do. But I wanted to bring it up because I think it's important for all of us to feel like we can contribute fully to what we're doing and not feel hindered by, I can't use this device, or I have to print everything out, or I have to get to the offices to get everything printed out to be able to feel, safe and secure in our own communications among family members and business. So that's my pitch, and I would love to know what other people took from that meeting, and also if how other commissioners feel about the risk that this brings.
Commissioner Babbitts.
I really appreciate Seth bringing this up because I think it is a good discussion for us to have. I have had my emails in court many times and had documents requested and had to go through depositions, all that sort of stuff related to my public service. And my goal has always been, or what I consider my best practice, is to make sure that any email, any documents that I have go through a server in such a way that a public information person can be responsive to any requests that are made, so that I never have to touch anything. So with the city, with the county, anytime my emails were requested, I simply shuttled that over to the to a recorder or to an administrator, and they dealt with it, and it did not force me to turn over devices which simply were being used as readers for emails that are kept on a public server. So that's kind of where I start, that I have not found a need. Now, that said, county does issue devices, and I don't think it's a bad practice, but to start with, we're reading devices, none of these devices are public devices, but the only Bridge Authority stuff that I'm doing is stuff that has passed through the county server at this point. We'll switch over to the .gov server. So I'm not worried about having to turn these devices over because there's nothing that uniquely exists here.
Commissioner Fox.
Yeah, Commissioner Babbitt. So did you, whenever you send an email with something attached to it to maybe one other member or to an executive director or whatever, do you also forward it to a special email account from the county?
No, it's not necessary because the server will, all that passes through the server. So there are copies of that kept on the server, and the county's responsible, in case of county business that we're talking, I assume is what you're asking about. The county is responsible for keeping all of that and for archiving all of that and all the practices related to that.
So once we have this .org set up, as long as we're using that for any email or transferring data that we've got, and it's on that .org, we don't worry about it. We don't have to worry about it.
So you're talking about .gov. So
for the new authority.
right, the new authority will have a .gov. So there are two separate things going on. One is if we're all using that email, then the authority's email server has all the information passing through it. So that is available for public inspection, through the normal processes. The reason for using a .gov server is a security reason, because then the federal government makes sure that the domain is not something that can be touched by people outside of the country. So it's basically a level of tamper proofing of the domain, which gives us an added degree of protection.
So kind of a second level question to that. Let's say that one of the commissioners is drafting a note using Word on personal computer, never sends the note, but it's on a topic that maybe somebody is interested with on a FOIA. How does that get captured, or does it?
So our attorneys are there and they can answer as to whether that work product is something that would be requestable, and FOIA is federal information, so I don't think, but it's just public. It's Oregon public records law that we're concerned about, and I would not do what you just said. If I'm going to be drafting a document, the document should, you want to keep the document itself in the cloud on a server. Yeah.
And I might, this is Seth again, I might point out as well that I did do a little bit of digging, and I think it's important to note that all of us, through the email addresses and accounts that we have access to I think it's a terabyte of cloud storage through OneDrive. So I've already, set that up to partition away everything that I've been working on and everything that I've been reviewing so that it's in the cloud. My main concern is more about, sort of, I guess, adverse requisitioning of devices, of, say, is it a possibility that somebody says, we believe there is public information on his device, even though he, swears that he does all of his work on the OneDrive and everything is saved there and through his official emails. Is there the possibility of having a personal device sort of requisitioned in a court case? Is not something that I'm totally clear on at this point.
I'm wondering if we can get Mark to give us a quick education on that. Hopefully he's been hearing all of this.
Well, I mean, people can ask for your personal device, whether there's anything on it or not, whether You know, so you could be issued a bridge authority device, and people might still ask for your personal device, you know, and so what you have described as best practices in terms of making sure that all public documents are available through the storage facilities of the bridge authority is exactly the policy that you want to maintain. The biggest risk really isn't so much personal computers or tablets, it's texting, because it's text, it's when you're in the context of texting on your personal phone, that those documents don't always necessarily get recorded or applied in a consistent manner under a records retention policy. So that's where we see the biggest problems that public officials have is in the texting arena.
And do you have a recommendation for how you would suggest we deal with the texting issue?
Well, you can limit your communications on your personal devices so that you're not doing that, you know, which is obviously a best practice, or you can obtain an official device either for security purposes or to ensure that the communications that you have are going through a single device and you're not relying on your personal device to conduct authority business.
Yeah, that was helpful. And I kind of, to pick up off of that, Seth, following up on your comment too, that was sort of going to be some of my thought, was that perhaps it's a best practice too on the authority for all commissioners that we're not texting about any authority related business, because we know that no one's got an authority provided cell phone. And my other understanding, which I would like clarification on, is that if we were to receive an authority related voicemail on a personal phone, we should be deleting that so that it doesn't become an archive that then would require that personal device to be gathered in terms of discovery or some sort of case where that information is being sought. But if it were deleted, then it would no longer exist. And maybe a best practice is not to leave voicemails about authority business. My other question back to the servers, because I think the sticky part, if we're all just worried about email, I feel comfortable there because the backups and the redundancy that's in place for if correspondence is happening through those authority email addresses, there is a protection that that's all getting captured. But when it comes to us reviewing documents, Word documents or PDFs where we're providing feedback or comments, should we be starting a practice now that once we get the .gov in place of only operating within an Office 365 or a Google Drive type space so that there aren't independent offline documents being created on personal computers that could be vulnerable to us forgetting to transfer to a hard drive and hand over to staff or include in an email so that it's captured in a cloud? Like, what would be the recommendation, or is there just an affirmation that we are going to transition to that where we're working in a document space that's also in a cloud-based system as well?
I think we should add these to the tasks for us to be looking at over the next 60 days in terms of governance and get some best practices put in place. These are all really good comments and we should take them under consideration.
I will say for my part, I appreciate Commissioner Babbitt's comments, and personally, I do not want another device to manage, and I do not want to have the overhead of I'm sitting down to do commission work. I need to go over and boot up this computer that needs to be charged and whatever. You kind of keep going with that. But I really appreciate strategies and knowing what kinds of things are going to open me up to the most scrutiny in this area. So I think the work being done around governance and coming up with best practices is likely to be enough from what I'm hearing. But certainly having a real procedure and protocol would make me feel more comfortable. So.
Thank you for bringing this up, Seth. I agree. I don't have any room left in my bag for more devices. But I think creating best management practices will definitely get us where we need to be and keep us out of the legal jeopardy that so many small governments fall into. With that, is there any further discussion on this? Seeing none, we will move into the legal counsel assignments.
All right, then that previous discussion was a good transition. as one of the first items here is public records policy and for our legal counsel to take a look at it. So what the background on this is just that we developed a list of activities that we believe the council should prioritize and take a look at. We've taken an attempt at what we think would be high priority first 30-day items, 60-day items, 90-day items, just really to prioritize them for them. And we just wanted to bring that back to the board, see if there's anything that anyone felt was missing, and also get authorization for them to start working on these activities. One general discussion item to add on here was, and this was under the initial piece on the agenda for general discussion, was the approach to assigning tasks should also be a part of this discussion to legal counsel. So I'll turn that back over to you all.
Has everybody had a chance to review the assignments? I know not everybody got a copy of the packet, so we may need to push that off a little bit. Or we can talk about it in general. Please.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in on one issue, which is the assignment of issues to the legal counsel, because I think that that's relatively simple and we can dispatch that. It is extremely important that we don't individually speak to the attorneys and have them working for us. They work for the authority. And so I think probably best practices for us as an authority is that the communication should go through either the project manager or the chair, and should not be coming through us individually.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's similar to what the port is doing with their legal counsel as well. It comes through the chair for the most part, although the executive director can in fact talk to them.
And if everybody has a chance to review these first 30 and first 60 days, there is a lot of work for legal counsel to work through. And we had a meeting with legal counsel with multiple board members that were present to try to make sure that we're spending time where it's most needed as quickly as possible. I would appreciate a motion to approve staff and legal counsel to move forward with the activities in that legal counsel services agreement.
I'll make the motion.
There's a motion and a second to move forward with the legal counsel services for those first 90 days. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Next up, let's move to the TIFIA letter of intent.
If someone's talking, we can't hear you on Zoom.
So we've been putting it in the table of contents. You can click on it and it takes you there. If you would like, we can add page numbers as well.
No, I think I just have it set up wrong because I'm not getting the table of contents. So let me just, it's probably a mistake on my part.
Okay, so what this is our TIFIA letter of intent. We've been back to DC multiple times. Every time we go back, they go, where's your letter of intent? And we keep going, oh, well, we'll get to it. Well, now we're to the point where we need to get to it and we need to get that letter of intent. And just for Mike's sake, that is not a 1-page letter of intent. That's a 60-page letter of intent. And from my perspective, we need to get this in and get this started much sooner rather than later, because at some point we may end up using the TIFIA loans as our cash on hand before, while we're waiting to get reimbursed. There may be a time in which we're going to have to pay commercial paper rates in order to have the cash to pay our contractors, because when we're big into construction, we could be burning $10 million a month. And if you miss 1 or 2 months where you don't get reimbursed from one of your grants and get the cash in hand, you might be up a creek real quick. And so the TIFIA is one option for that, and then commercial paper is another. If we can use TIFIA, that'd be a lot cheaper than using commercial paper. There's the scope and the schedule to get this in for a submittal of November. And this isn't an action item, but I think this is a concurrence item that we move forward with the TIFIA letter and intent. Does that sound good to everyone? Great. Did I mess anything up, Mike?
Nope, just if you have anything, if anybody has any questions specific to what goes into that TIFIA letter, Kerry's here and he could give you a little more background if you want it, or he could answer any questions that anyone have, but if you're good, we can move on.
So I guess this is for Carrie. If you see a challenge getting this done by early November, late October, could you let us know?
Yes, sir. That is our target date. What we're doing, just for everyone's information, is working backwards from a target to have the TIFIA loan closed and available to us by March of 2026. That's what our cash flows show us doing. Now, if you look at our current schedule, assuming everything else works correctly in the funding and finance, we won't actually need the TIFIA money until late 2029. And the way TIFIA works is you don't start paying interest until you make your draw, and you only draw as much as you need. So it is to our advantage to make it the last money. The other thing is typically TIFIA would prefer, and in fact probably won't close the loan unless they actually are the last money in. So the emphasis to date has been on getting the other money lined up. But it is time to be working on this letter of intent. And as Mike said, I just want to impress on folks that, it sounds really simple, and it's actually, they make it even worse. It's not a letter of intent. I misspoke there. It's a letter of interest. So it sounds like, Carrie, just write us a letter and tell us you're interested. The fact is, it is really a draft credit application. And so, the projects I'm most familiar with have typically been much further along in their funding development when you go to TIFIA. And typically it involves a preliminary credit rating opinion from one of the big credit rating agencies. It involves a lot of traffic and revenue analysis, which as of July, we now have available to us through the study from Washington State. But it really is a draft credit application, because they spend about 18 months then working with you on this application. The other thing that's important, one of the reasons that they push hard to get your letter of interest in is at that point you become an applicant, and at that point you begin paying them to review your credit application. Part of this is that you'll be requested to sign a sponsor payment agreement, which basically says we're going to evaluate your credit agreement and we're going to hire bond counsel to represent us. They are going to hire their own traffic and revenue consultants, and you're going to pay for all that. So they tell you it's between $200,000 and $300,000 that you should be prepared to spend reimbursing them for their evaluation. They want to get all of that done ahead of time, and only at the very end of that process do they actually invite you to submit an actual application for credit. And once you do that, they have something, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something like 90 days. So they want to do all this work up front so that they can meet their 90-day deadline. So I just wanted to make you aware of so I think it behooves us to submit as complete an application as we possibly can by November. And so we're working with our own folks internally and with the port's municipal advisor, PFM, to develop that.
Just a thought, Carrie, turn off your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
maybe I'm wrong and you guys tell me, but what I took away from the meetings out in DC, the last two, is I'm just wondering if we have a difference in definition. The impression that I got from the folks that we were talking to on this letter of intent was not a 60-page document, and they kind of talked about it a bit and talked about the reviews and the costs and so on. But it seems to me they were after us to give them kind of the front end of that application, if you will, that gets us on the list that, hey, they recognize we're coming to them, but we're not ready yet. And I'm just wondering if we've got a problem with definitions or expectations. And I'm wondering whether it would be worth a phone call to the fellow that we met with the last time, that just to clarify before we go spend, you know, a bunch of effort on a document that we know is going to be premature. What does he really want now? Does he want, to simplify, does he want the first 3 pages of the document and the rest of it's going to come later? And here's how he's going to use it to basically tell everybody, yep, they're coming, they're going to be here. Put us in a placeholder someplace. That's my concern right now. Are we sure we're on the same page as far as what the request really is today?
If I might, I agree. I think that is a fabulous idea, because I will be perfectly honest with you. The advice that you're getting, and I've talked to enough people independently to know that that is the advice you're being given. It's not a misunderstanding on our end about what we're hearing. But what we're hearing from Build America Bureau is not consistent with practice that I'm familiar with, and that our people at PFM, who quite frankly, the folks at PFM have done 30 TIFIA applications. And in fact, they work as hired financial advisors for TIFIA. And they're as confused as I am about that request. So I think clarifying it and making sure we understand what they're expecting to receive from us is probably a good move, and we'll do that.
Just so it gets on the record. So can we set up such a phone call?
Yeah, we'll get that set up. Well, this moves right into our next conversation about our travel request approval for Washington, DC this fall. We usually do 2 trips a year. Those are usually around funding as well as TIFIA. And it was, you know, my goal to not go back without that letter of intent, so that when we meet with TIFIA this time, at least we know that we're doing what they've asked us to do. We're not just asking for the same thing over and over. The other thing is with our grant applications being turned in, that's usually a good time to go back and beat the street and make sure our congressional delegation is sending in letters of support and everything else we need. And sometimes phone calls go further than letters these days. With that, we need to decide, number one, do we want to spend money to do that? This money would likely come from the loan from the port. Because it's a non-reimbursable, because it's going back for lobbying and legislation. And then who would we want to send over there? So I will open that up for discussion. If in the previous trip, it was from the board, it was Mike Shannon, Mike Fox, Commissioner Anderson, and Commissioner Keithler. Sorry, Mayor, I always bumble because I always want to say mayor, and you're not a mayor here, you're a commissioner here.
No worries.
With that, is there anybody who would like to go, that would like to step in any of these chairs to do the dog and pony show?
I can go as long as I have all the relevant information and set everybody up for actually being successful in getting this thing done. And I would just need to know dates and when it's actually happening, because I have a few things going on at the end of October.
Please.
Something to keep in mind, I think, too, is that what we're talking about now is the major grant application that we just put in. I personally believe we've got a lot of work left yet on the Oregon side, less so in the Washington side, but we're not done there either. So I think we're gonna have to divide forces and get some concerted, really strong effort going after Oregon. Lesser extent for Washington, but I think we got one more big push on the DC grant. So I think we're talking about 3 trips, not 1 trip. And the 3 trips, the 2 to the States, I can very easily see 3 or 4 trips down to Salem. So as we're talking. One last thing, maybe to help you too. Just before this meeting, Carrie and I and Mike had some discussions on a blackboard about this federal grant and what are the steps that take place and who reviews that grant, leading toward eventually the secretary making a call on it. So we've challenged Carrie and others to lay that schedule out, which is kind of a guess, but it's an educated guess. And then identify off of those who should be our target visitors, that we want to go talk to. And when are those decisions going to probably get made? And we want to be there just before that decision. So that's coming up too, but it looks like probably November, December for the Fed trip. And it may even be 2 trips. Because we're going.
I have a question about timing. If it is about the federal grant that we just submitted, do we think December is somewhat late if we're trying to still be able to connect with some of those eventual decision makers early on so that we are in their mind as they're going into the later stages of review? Seems like their cycle, I would imagine this year they might be aiming to stay more structured and have these decisions or determinations by January at the latest, because they're going to want to be teed up for a more rigid schedule in 24 when they've got a presidential election looming.
I think it would be helpful the next meeting if we had that little mini schedule, little flow chart done to show us what's going to take place, Marla, because what I see, there's at least 3 internal screens by the department before anybody politically really jumps in to make any kind of real decision. And those first 3 screens looks like to me is going to take 3 to 4 months. So that probably fits into the discussion, which I think is a great one we need to have that you brought up.
I think to the other question, I'm certainly open to traveling. I think it's important that we have a few different commissioners. And now that we obviously have our fully seated authority, I think it'd be great too to have some new faces as some of the other commissioners get comfortable with that idea of speaking on behalf of the project. So if I'm helpful, I'm happy to assist. And if there's others stepping in, I think that's great too.
I was wondering, has Summit Strategies given us any advice on how to do this or when to do this?
Yeah, we've been talking to them. They're looking into it too, as far as figuring out the best time strategically to be there. So we need to continue to discuss it with them and watch the process and then figure out. So it'll probably be not a ton of notice. That's why we wanted to get approval now to just be able to go. And then we'll probably get a short notice of, hey, you need to be here in a month. Hopefully it'll be a little more than that, but we should anticipate a short poll on when we got to get out there and go. So
well, then I would say, like, procedurally, should we be approving today the number of commissioners that we want to send so we give staff flexibility? If, say, those of us who are saying we're willing, have schedule restrictions, staff's able to make a decision of next available commissioners and we're not holding it up because we made a motion today that's specific on names.
Yes, Marla, that would be my recommendation. But we want to know who would be interested, but we definitely need to know it. From my perspective, we definitely want someone from at least one commissioner from Oregon and one commissioner from Washington, since we'll be meeting with the delegations of both. But goes to you.
For what it's worth, I think when you're going back and asking for this kind of money, I think repetitive individuals coming back with the same face and perhaps an evolving story would be a whole lot more compelling than a new face showing up and telling a slightly different story than before. I think having those same faces that said, well, yeah, and since last time we were here, we've done all these things as well. And maybe there's a new face to introduce at that time.
Yeah.
I think that might be a stronger kind of ask or approach. And
I'm
maybe
really
that
glad you brought that
changes.
up, Eric.
Okay. And maybe
I
that
think that's great.
changes with different, there's obviously more work to do in Oregon and more work to do in Washington. That maybe there's a different kind of lead on that, or maybe that mixes up a little bit, but the big one, let's not throw the dice.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I was thinking like there probably is a benefit to continuity, but maybe what we're also teeing up is bringing one, new commissioner into the fold, and then subsequent trips continuing to transition. And so that by the time we're at this time next year, it's 3 different commissioners that are telling that story through this next funding cycle, and they're able to build these relationships. But I think Eric raises a good point that we have been investing a lot of sweat equity and building up some familiarity with our project and relationships, and probably nurturing those handoffs and bringing new commissioners in as part of those that they've already been working with or that have been making the trips is like a softer landing for everyone.
So I would like to suggest that we authorize 3 commissioners to go to DC sometime before the calendar year is out, and the details to be worked on later.
Was that a motion? And was that a second? Second. It was. Any further discussion? Thank you all. This is great discussion. I firmly understand where you're coming from, Eric, with the belief in continuity. That's one of the reasons that there's a few of us from the Old Bi-State Working Group that are still on the authority, because we believe in continuity to keep this thing moving forward and not taking a left turn. With that, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the informational items. We covered most of that, so we're not going to cover it any longer in the bridge update. You're going to talk about it when it's on the agenda from now on. Okay, next up, one other thing, we have the upcoming action items, which is the intergovernmental agreement with the Port Hood River. We have not yet seen the full intergovernmental agreement. We have only seen the parts for the funding assistance. And I have a feeling there will be a lot of discussion with the actual intergovernmental agreement when we do see that as well. And so that is an upcoming action item, but we won't be probably seeing that for a meeting or two from the full board. Okay, next up, we have confirmation appointment of officers. Okay. Right. All right, moving on. We blew through this. Let's go to the presentations. The geotechnical investigation. We're all excited about it. Some of us really wanted to see it 2 weeks ago, but now we've got more holes, so.
Deeper roles.
Deeper holes.
And we do have 3 presentations today. We're going to have the geotech presentation. Then we're also going to cover construction staging. We've got folks from KMC, Drew and Lee here. They'll go through some construction staging options. And then we have a brief discussion about just right away and what it means to do a right away on a federal project. So those will be the 3 for today.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan Villeneuve with GRI, Geotechnical Resources, Inc. Also here is Scott Schlechter. He's our president and the principal in charge for the project. We're going to give you an update on the geotechnical investigation. So this is a summary of our field exploration program. So we plan to do 13 borings, 2 on the Oregon upland side, southern part of the bridge. 1 on the Washington upland side. Sorry, it's a little hard to see. Let me turn on the laser pointer. So one on the Washington Upland side, B13, and then we had 10 over water. There's also on this map 3 other borings that were done in 2010 as part of the type, size, and location study. So we were unable to get B11 and B12 due to really shallow water and quite a few obstructions. But otherwise, we got all the rest of these borings. They ranged in depth from 50 feet to 160 feet below the ground surface or the river bottom if they were over water. We also conducted 2 cone penetration tests down on the Oregon upland side. That's these white dots down here. And that's a test where we drive a metal cone into the ground and it continuously collects data, which we can correlate to soil behavior type. We installed a water level logger in B1, this boring right here by the port office. And that is continuously monitoring the water level for the Oregon approach. We didn't need one in B13 up on the Washington side because it's high enough in elevation. And then we are currently, field explorations are done. The barge left last week. I don't know, you guys probably saw it out there. But we are currently in our laboratory testing stage. So we are working on testing our soil classification tests to identify the soils. We're doing selected seismic testing on certain samples for earthquake analysis. And then we're also going to start moving into our rock hardness testing pretty soon here, which I'll touch on a little bit later. Just a few photos. This one is from B1 by the port office. That's the drill rig right there. Photo in the upper right here is the barge in the middle of the river, bridge in the background. And then the photo in the bottom right here is on the barge. That's the drill rig. And then this is Melissa, one of our field representatives, logging one of the soil samples. Few more photos. This is the drill rig. I'll just give a brief overview of how that works. So there's a hole in the barge and we set casing from the barge all the way down to the river bottom that seals off the drilling operation from the river, so we're not contaminating it with drilling fluid. And it's a little hard to see, but in the photo here, these are the drilling rods. And so we're able to attach a drill bit to the bottom of those rods. Those go down the casing, drill out the soil or rock. And then we're able to pull the rods out and put a sampler on the bottom. And that's this middle photo right here. So we call this a split barrel sampler. And we pound that into the ground with a hammer, pull it back up, and we get this, something like this, a soil core. And then the photo up here on the right, once we get through all of that soil, we get to competent rock, we start coring that. That's a continuous operation. And so we have a run of core in the upper right here. And so we log that once it comes out of the ground, and then put it into boxes, take those boxes back to our office for further examination and testing. So the purpose, why are we out there? We kind of identified 3 main goals, if you will. Number 1 was to reduce subsurface uncertainty. So what's going on underground where the bridge alignment is going to go. Number 2, we want to minimize foundation and seismic risk. So foundations, what kind of foundations, how deep, what are they going to look like? And then seismic risk is related to earthquakes, which is a complicated topic. And then number 3, we wanted to facilitate design and early work. So when the progressive design builder comes on board, we want them to be able to take this information and hit the ground running. So that first topic, subsurface materials, we want to reduce uncertainty. I know this is hard to read. We're going to zoom in on a couple spots, but this is an excerpt of the profile from the 2010 type, size, and location study. And so we're basically looking, it's hard to see. This is the navigation channel over here. Sorry, there's a delay with the laser pointer too. So we're basically looking on the Oregon, the southern side of the bridge. So we'll zoom in on the Oregon approach right there, red box. So this is a little zoomed in version. All the orange is our current explorations. So we have CPT1, B1, CPT2, the port office is about right here. And then the bridge starts going over the river. So what I want to point out is this black dashed line was the estimated top of rock from 2010 study. And so what our explorations show, they have this peak right here. We found it over here under the port office. So that peak has been shifted a few hundred feet south. And then we also found that it comes up a little bit higher than what they were estimating too. So that's a pretty big difference between what they thought they had before and what we know now. And they also only show it, you know, stopping here, and we now have information all the way out to here to the marina parking lot. So back to the overall profile, we're going to zoom in on this section right here, which is the overwater portion of the Oregon side. So same thing, orange is our explorations, and this black dashed line is the estimated top of rock. This smaller dashed line is the river bottom. And so what we found is that our explorations B3, 4, 5, and 6 ended up going a lot deeper than we were estimating. So for example, B5 here, we thought we'd get about 50 feet and hit rock. We actually ended up with 135 feet and found rock way down here. Sorry, it's hard to see, but this is our estimated top of rock now. So that's over triple the depth of what it was. And the bridge foundations are actually founded on, this ended up being a gravel layer that we punched through and hit some more sand and gravel for another 100 feet before getting to coreable rock down here. So that's quite a bit different. Correct. It's not a rock. I don't know. Yes.
The other thing here to watch out for is, do we have exposure on our $520 million? Because it looks like we're going to have to drive the piles much deeper than what that estimate showed.
Yeah, so that's exactly why we want to go out there and do this now, so we can find that out now before getting too far down the road and realizing that we now have to adjust the design to triple the depth. So it's something definitely to look at. I couldn't give an answer now, but
one other observation for you. So if the current bridge is sitting on that sediment, that should be a concern to us, I would think. If we got any kind of earthquake, we got more of a challenge than if it was sitting on bedrock.
yeah, I think Scott, you want to?
Yeah, I'll just jump in here, and we're still in the middle of looking through that data. But once we do the analysis, look through that, we'll know if there's an issue with conditions right now and have a better idea if that's an issue, or maybe it's okay the way it is. But once we get through looking at the rest of the samples and doing some of the additional testing, we'll have a much better idea of, is there a risk to the bridge now, and then what it does mean for costs going forward.
Luckily, it survived 100 years. Please continue.
Awesome. So the next topic is reducing risk from foundations. So this is a couple photos of drilled shaft construction. The photo on the left is the casing they use to advance it, and just trying to give you a general idea of the size of these things. The photo on the right is the drill rig that they use to excavate the drilled shaft. If you have crossed the 205 bridge, Abernathy Bridge recently, that's what they're doing over there, similar construction. So one of the main considerations with drilled shafts is we want to get down to rock to get that capacity, but excavating rock can be very difficult. And on the right, we have the rock hardness chart that we use. And so basically, once we get to hard R4 or R5, that significantly increases the difficulty of excavating that rock and the time and resources the contractor needs to do it. So what we are doing, the photo on the left is a photo of an unconfined compressive strength test on a sample of the rock core that I showed you earlier. So we will be testing a lot of that rock core to determine these values, so we can provide that to the estimators and contractors so they know what they're getting into. These are a few photos of rock excavation. The photo on the left is a pneumatic hammer that's literally chipping out the rock inches at a time. This photo here is a rock excavation bucket. And then this is a rock excavation auger. This is all kind of specialty tooling that the contractor needs to have on hand and know about ahead of time. And then this photo at the top is, it's kind of hard to see, but this is one of these teeth on the bottom of the rock auger, and it's been melted from grinding on rock for so long. So it's a very difficult process. And they want to know this information way ahead of time so they can plan accordingly. The other thing we want to look for is minimizing risk from seismic hazards, so earthquakes. In addition to the seismic response of the actual bridge to an earthquake, geotechnically, we're looking at liquefaction, which is the loss of strength of the soil during shaking, and then lateral spread, which is essentially a earthquake-induced landslide. And so these photos are from the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, and just some examples of some of the damage that can happen from liquefaction or lateral spread. So mitigating seismic hazards is typically a major component of the design and can be a significant cost. So we want to know that information ahead of time and establish the general parameters of any mitigation. The photo on the right here is just an example from a bridge in Miami of a seismic mitigation construction process. So it takes a lot of equipment and space and time. And then just touching base, going back again to that snip of the profile, now that we know we've extended this rock line from unknown, basically under the Oregon approach, to much further south, that's going to help everybody establish the general parameters, the size, the cost, and really help with the estimation. And then finally, we want to facilitate the design and planning. So we're going to take all the information we've collected from the field exploration program, put it in a data report. That report will include boring logs, which we have an example here on the left, and that's essentially a log, a summary of the borings that provides all the valuable information in one place. And then we will also develop a geologic interpretive profile. So a nice colorful representation of the geology under the bridge alignment. And that way we can all reference basically one document for what the subsurface information we have now. And that will allow the design team to better plan their field exploration programs. So there will be more borings, but they'll know where to put them. The proposal estimates will be more informed. We know where that rock line is a little bit better now. And then there will be schedule benefits because some of this information is already done and they can hit the ground running in several processes. And that's it. Any questions?
Could you speak to the variation between the 2010 study and your study?
Sure. Let me go back to the very beginning. So I know it's hard to see, but the 2010 study drilled 3 borings. So they have one here and then one on each side of the navigation channel. So then if we go back to the profile, so essentially we've got those 2 of those, the southern 2 borings here. They don't have any other information for the entire length of the bridge. So if I was able to show you this note, it essentially says that they're using old bridge records and all the information publicly available that they can to make estimates for the rest of the bridge alignment. When we go out there, we're drilling holes that are 6 inches in diameter. And so we will really only know what's going on in those specific locations and then have to extrapolate in between. And so without any borings over here, they just didn't know.
Have you gotten far enough along in the investigation to understand what our liquefaction problems might be on either shore?
We have not, but the 2010 study did touch on that, and there was an identified risk of liquefaction. So I think the next steps for us is definitely to look into that a little more and kind of flush that out, especially that we have, like we just discussed, they only have these 2 borings right here. And so we will essentially do the same process for some of these other ones, definitely on the Oregon approach, and flush that out a little more.
Okay, and then the follow on is the rock profile on the Oregon side. Is that a secondary channel then that was with the rock coming up and then dropping down again? Is that a?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a possibility. We're gonna definitely take a look at that. It could be due to the way the Columbia River basalt is what is out there. That could be how those flows are oriented and tilted. So that's another explanation, but yeah, we'll be looking into that.
So when do we see more and what do we see next?
Good question. So the data report is essentially what you'll see next. That'll be essentially our final product. So we'll send a draft to the internal project team to review and everything. As far as when that gets public, I'm not sure. But I'm sure we'd want to include it as part of the RFP package in some form so that people who are proposing on this project will have that information. I'm sorry?
Order of magnitude for timing.
Oh,
Weeks, months, years?
months. Yeah, by the end of the year.
Any
I
other
have a,
questions?
yes, this is Seth online. I have a question about the slide that we're looking at right now. For boring B7, is that your results essentially agree with the previous results? I see that there's no orange dashed line for competent rock there. Is that just because the dashed gray line existing is accurate?
That's because I did this presentation 2 weeks ago and we finished since then. So
Oh, I see.
It's just not updated.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
curious, a follow on to that, which probably has a similar answer, is the borings on the northern end of the bridge, north of the navigation channel. Do they contain similar surprises to the southern side of the channel, or were they more in line with what B8, 9, 10, I know 11 and 12 weren't done, but were they more in line with what was expected?
Yes, so we were able to do these three B8, B9, and B10 and got much closer to the estimated rock profile from 2010 than these borings on the southern side. So the okay. So yeah, we feel a lot better about that.
It's exciting.
Is that better? There we go. The other consideration is it's much shallower rock over there. So less room for surprise.
Great. So just kind of bringing that back to the cost, it's really the differential between what we were expecting and what we should be expecting now is really in the vicinity of that B5, 6, 7 area there. The rest of whatever estimations had been done previously would be accurate or close to accurate.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not to say that obviously there's a lot of work that needs to get done in order to determine if any foundations actually have to go all the way to rock. So I don't want to put that out there that everything's triple the depth or whatever. We will be looking into that for sure.
Great. Thank you.
So I know that a topobathymetric study was done in 2021 for the Oregon side. Would that data help with your analysis, specifically the liquefaction?
Yeah, so when we do the liquefaction and lateral spread, so that earthquake-induced landslide, we end up cutting cross sections of the bridge alignment, and so knowing exactly where the topography, the bathymetry is very helpful for us. And we'll probably end up, I would assume there will probably be another bathymetric study conducted to further update the Washington side and all of that.
Told you they were really excited.
You were lying.
All right, having no other questions, thank you so much, Nathan. All right, we will move on to our next is the construction staging. And I hope you found us a good spot. And it better come with a lease.
Good afternoon. We're going to be doing a presentation today on construction, but also talking about the means and methods as well as the staging and logistics, just to kind of, and talking with Mike, we wanted to kind of preface the group here because many of you are going to review the RFP and look at the information as it comes out. So getting familiar with the terminology, some of the construction means and methods that we're going to see in those presentations, and trying to understand how the bridge is going to get put together. And then why the staging is important for how the bridge is going to get put together. So, and you can see the agenda there. We're going to give a brief intro, talk about the preferred alternative, and then the logistics and staging with that. And then also look at another reasonable alternative that you may see when the RFPs come together, and then the logistics that go with that. So intro, my name is Drew Clark. I work for KMC. KMC is working with the team doing the constructability reviews, and we'll be helping with the estimating during the independent cost estimate work. And we also were involved early in the project during the environmental phase and some of the estimating during that. And I'll let Lee introduce himself.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Lee Zink, and I'm also with KMC. I had worked about 30 years with the Kiewit companies, and primarily ran big bridge projects around North America. And then I retired 8 years ago, and then Kelly McNutt called me about 4 years ago when she had this interest in starting this company. And so I've been on board with her and helped get her company established, and helping owner agencies and design firms with the early upfront work on their projects is primarily where we like to focus on. How do you get a better constructible project, a better schedule, a better estimate, to help projects have a better chance of success, because all these projects have their problems, and as much as you can do up front, the better off we'll all be. And it's nice to see a good geotech investigation going on, because that really helps in projects getting a good start. So Drew. Okay. So we'll start off, we'll talk about the preferred alternative, which is called a cast in place segmental bridge. And it's what's been worked on for the design thus far. And some of the terminology that you'll tend to hear is on the left-hand side, we have this schematic with a bunch of colors. And the right-hand side, we have a real picture of part of a bridge under construction. So you start off down below the water level with what's in blue, which is the foundations. My guess is here you'll probably have drilled shafts, like some pictures were shown of previously, and we'll also show some more pictures of that. To help support some of the temporary works and maybe some foundations, you'll probably also have driven piles. Above the foundation is what's called the cap. It could be called the footing, pile cap, either one of those. Sometimes they're at water elevation, sometimes they're down below water elevation, depending on how they do the design. And to get those built, oftentimes they have cofferdams around them. Above the cap is in green is the column. Almost always it's a concrete column going up. For the cast in place segmental bridge, you'll have what's shown in yellow, which is a pier table. These are cast in place pier tables, and I'll have some pictures of some real life ones further in the program. And then the purple is segmental stuff, and the bridge is normally built in like 16-foot chunks on each side of the yellow. So it tries to stay in balance about the pier. So you build a segment on one side, you build a segment on the other side, you advance your travelers out and keep repeating until you get to the middle of the bridge span. Site access and staging is going to be a big challenge for this project. Any of these water crossings take a lot of trestle or temporary work bridges, as they're often called. They'll take temporary platforms at your footing locations. You'll have a lot of marine equipment floating around, storage barges, crane barges. I think when I went through the environmental stuff, I said there'd be probably 30 deck barges plus 6 or 7 crane barges. It was some number like that, plus a whole bunch of access trestle. I think we said about 100,000 square feet of access trestle. And that's based off of previous water crossings that have it's been in my experience, and how much access it takes. Plus, you need land area to support all that endeavor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. If you guys have questions, please stop in the middle, and if it'd be easier to answer questions and address them. This is a potential layout drawing of this job. It actually is this job. And when part of KMC was working on the initial estimate for this cast in place segmental plan, one of the guys had drawn up this idea of where the access trestles could be at, where the work platforms would be. He showed a bunch of the crane barges and work deck barges out on the water. And so it's just an idea. You'll see some stuff like this from the contractors as well. What this doesn't show is this picture here probably has 16 or 20 barges. It doesn't have all the barges that are tied up back of the dock being loaded out with materials and all the other things that are a little bit removed from the project site. So you end up with quite just a flotilla out there to support the work. Drew?
Well, I was going to talk about foundations a little bit, but I don't really need to because you guys did a pretty good job. And I think the biggest thing to take away from their presentation is doing those borings is critical. We've seen it on so many jobs when they elect to not do the foundations as early as they did on this job. So it'll be helpful. There's just some more pictures of doing some of this work off the work trestle, just some different size drilled shafts. And so I think on this job, it's 8 foot and 4 foot was what was in the preliminary. So just some more samples of that. And then doing the pile caps and columns, just traditional work, working off a work trestle or a work bridge. I think the things that are critical to know about when we get to these areas though, is like the access plan that Lee had shown earlier. And then what this shows is it's very limited access, but there's a lot of work that has to go into it with concrete deliveries, placement. And so the logistics of coordinating work like this between the marine end and the work bridge end is a lot to get done, working in multiple spaces. And then working the column on the way up, and you can see the cofferdam in the picture. I don't have the pointer on here, but you can see it where those piles are at the end of that trestle coming out. And then I'll let Lee talk about pier tables a little bit more.
Yeah, this is a picture of, we call it the Skyway Bridge. It was part of the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge. It was replacing the bridge from the earthquake damage back in '89. And what you see here is a series of columns that have been built out over the water, and pier table forms up at many of those column locations. For this job, we actually serviced each of those column locations, those pier tables. We put up a tower crane at each one. That's why you can see there's like 12 tower cranes in that picture. It worked well for that environment. I'm not saying that's a good solution here, but it worked well for that job down there. And the pier tables are very complicated formwork. They're usually one of the most complicated elements of the structure because you're tying that column that comes up into a horizontal structure. And they normally take anywhere from 4 to 6 months to build each one of these. So you'll hear a lot about pier tables, both in the contractor's proposals, as well as when you actually go into real construction. We're going to talk a little bit more here, a little bit about some concrete placement ideas, because that's always a big issue when you have the concrete bridges over water, is how do you get concrete out to you? And what's the different transportation modes you can use? This is pictures of the form travelers building the bridge out horizontally. There's quite a bit of engineering that goes into building a bridge with travelers. And they're fairly complicated pieces of equipment. As long as the bridge is, I'll say, reasonably designed, the equipment is fairly available in the rental market here in the United States and Europe. So it's not that difficult to come by. And a number of contractors have pretty good experience in using these form travelers. But again, getting all the materials out to you is the biggest challenge: concrete, rebar, post-tensioning materials and so on. So this is a site layout that's in one of the contract documents. And I know it's really pretty small here on this screen. Finding areas for this project, I wish there was a magical answer. You know, it seems to me on the Oregon side, you have the most available piece of land right at the end of the bridge, which is where the port's office is, and there's some parking lots and things like that. And to me, that's kind of a critical piece of land to support this project. You know, it'd be there 4 acres there, 5 acres, something like that. I know there's a boat ramp in there that's could be problematic, and there might be ways to relocate that, but that's an ideal piece of property to support construction. The north side of the bridge, where it comes on land, there's really not that much land right there. I do think over on the white salmon side, down along the river, there's some industrial property that would probably be ideal for a contractor to use as a staging area. Building a bulkhead where they transfer materials on and off barges. And, you know, they probably need 5 acres there or something just to support that sort of endeavor. And the only close place I can really see is on the north side there for that endeavor. So I'd see the Oregon side more as offices, employee parking, getting people staged and taking the boats out to and from work. And the white salmon side being more the industrial side of material loadouts. So I think 5 acres in total is probably a bare minimum of what you would need to support the job. For the, yes.
On that staging area for this type of a build, you'd probably be thinking about a couple of batch plants over there.
Well, there obviously needs to be a batch plant someplace, and you have to be able to transfer concrete onto the water. So it would not surprise me if there is an on-site batch plant proposed by a contractor. It would probably be on the white salmon side. The commercial supplier in Hood River, you know, you just don't have good water access to get concrete on and off a barge. And you need to have that access. So again, I would not be surprised if someone doesn't propose putting an on-site batch plant on the north side. You'll actually see a picture here in a little bit of a floating batch plant. That's been used on some jobs. Most of them have been bigger jobs than this because it's an expensive endeavor to put one on a barge. It's risky environmentally. And so people would tend to go more with a land side batch plant. So for the cast in place segmental option, guesstimate is you probably need parking for about 200 vehicles. Just think about the workforce that's necessary. You'll see here on an option of going to precast, you'd need less parking demand because there'd be less on-site labor. You'll probably also have mooring facilities out in the river someplace for tying up barges too. And again, if you got 30 pieces of floating equipment plus 6 or 8 floating cranes, you got a lot of stuff to manage out there on the water. Yeah.
So moorage, you tend to want to move it downstream, correct? If something breaks loose, you're going into the current bridge, which is not a good thing.
Right.
And you could be going into the new bridge, which is tearing up stuff that we don't want to get torn up. Which means if we go below the bridge, we've got more congestion with all the cell borders and everybody else that's out there. And then we're competing against the that silt built up that's out in the middle of the river.
Right.
So there's not a lot of room down there unless you go farther south.
You know, I think I would do the tie-ups and stuff to the east side of the bridge. And if there's a risk of stuff floating away, manage that risk somehow.
Stuff tends to float upriver because of the prevailing wind.
Okay,
Most
yeah,
of it, seriously.
okay. Yeah, I think you try to keep as much stuff, the big stuff, to the east side of the bridge as possible. I think partially because that's where seems to be more space at. Okay, specialty equipment. You're gonna have a lot of derrick barges. We'll have a picture here, some spud barges, tugboats, concrete batch plant, a lot of rebar delivery, and then a lot of false work support structure or barges and stuff too. It's just amazing the amount of materials you have to haul around to support a bridge job.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard a lot of these terms already just in working through the project so far, but when you see like these big derrick barges, I mean, when we're talking derrick barges, we're not just talking small cranes on a barge like you've probably seen doing some of the local things. We're talking about very large 300-ton cranes on barges and big elements probably coming from outside of the area, depending on where you're looking at for the kind of work that needs to happen on this job. There is obviously not as much in the local end of it for the train barge size that you'll probably likely need on this job. I mean, there's some elements you can build up and kind of work together, but not a lot of local availability for the specialties pieces like that.
Drew, give us dimensions of what you might see on a derrick barge?
Well, you do have limitations with the locks here. So the biggest barge that I know that can fit through the locks that I've seen is the DB Los Angeles. And it's, I think, a 260 by 80 barge or 280 by 80, something like that. I mean, they can fit 300-foot long barges in here, but that's about the widest. When they did the work at the guideway up at the Dalles Dam, that crane was doing the work on the big precast elements that set there. Yeah. So, and I mean, if you want a good image of the LA, it's working at the Abernethy Bridge and you can see it on the Willamette down there. So, you'll see a lot of spud barges. I'm sure you see them up and down the river already. So nothing that's uncommon, and tugboats pushing stuff back and forth between grain and other things up and down the river. So,
What's the spud barge?
so if you see in the picture, right, it's got one or two piles on it effectively with wells, and they anchor it down in the more shallow water. Obviously, when you're out at the deeper ends, they'll work off of an anchor system, but a lot of the smaller material support barges will be spudded down so they can hold themselves to a degree, and they'll obviously be tied up quite often as well around here with the wind and the weather that you have. So
That's the kind of barge we use, if you saw that.
okay. And then we talked about concrete. So, I mean, you can see the traditional concrete plants. I mean, this is something similar size-wise that might be set up for an on-site batching, depending on the volume needs and the cycles for what the job needs. It'll be sized for that. And then, the floating batch plant, like Lee said, I mean, this is a picture from a job in New York, and it's a much, in the conditions here, it may not be as available given the winds and the other things and the engineering required for those kind of pieces.
I have a quick question. How much space is it? I believe you said around 5 acres is that just for a batch plant, or is there a smaller amount of acreage suitable for a batch plant? What would it need, and how close would it need to be to the water here?
So it would be dependent on where they're at in the job, but you would want it to be within whatever the time limits are for placement of concrete. And you would probably want it within, I would assume, a 20-minute drive of where it needs to be loaded onto the water, if it's in the scenario where we see these concrete trucks getting delivered, because usually you time out on concrete at about 90 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. So that'll be kind of the driving factor on where it needs to be. And on the acreage size, that'll really be dependent on, kind of the means and methods on how the contractor chooses to do the work bridge access versus how much they want to do in a marine delivery. It's obviously a little bit more flexible if they can do more work off of that work bridge or something else because they can drive out to it. So it's just more planning. But yeah.
Okay, so on the right-hand side of this is concrete. Another method is just driving concrete trucks onto barges, which means you have a pretty significant ramp system to get trucks on and off the barges, an anchoring system for the barge so it doesn't shoot out from underneath you. But that's a fairly common method that gets used on these types of jobs. Here's a schematic of building the cast in place segmental bridge. Here you see two piers. The piers have been built, the pier table has been built. They have a traveler on each end to building the segments. It's fairly common that once you get going on these traveler systems that the contractor gets one segment per week on each end of the bridge. So they add on a 16-foot chunk every week with that form traveler. And then opposite end of the bridge, they're doing the same thing. They're adding a 16 feet per week. That's fairly common cycle time for this type of work. Ultimately, those leaves of the bridge get close together and you take the travelers away and you do what's called a closure pour. And that joins the bridge leaves together. And then you do post-tensioning to tie it all together and compress it. So it's a pretty slick system and it goes pretty quick once you get going at it. So reasonable alternatives. I'm sure you're going to hear some reasonable alternatives. Contractors are pretty good with their ingenuity as long as the owner agencies leave the doors open so they can be creative in how they want to go after this job. A reasonable alternative that you'll probably hear about here is precast segmental. Some of the spans for this structure are very conducive to precast segmental. And then some of the spans out at the main river crossing get a little bit on the long side, but they are still doable with precast segmental. The nice thing about precast segmental is it takes a big chunk of the man hours off of the river and takes it to a precast facility someplace else, which can be upland most places, or for most of these segments, it could be upland somewhere. Some of the segments, if you do precast segmental out over the main river crossing, the segments get pretty tall and they're not really truckable. So you'd have to load them onto a barge and transport them by water. So it'll be interesting to see what contractors really come up with. In today's environment, if I was pursuing this job, I would try to really pursue an alternative where I took man hours off of the water and took it someplace else. Be it precast segmental, concrete girders, steel girders, for as much of the job as possible. Because craft labor is getting very difficult to come by. And where this job is, you don't have a big craft following. There's not that many craft people in this region. So you're going to pull people out of Portland, and there's lots of jobs in Portland. So why do you want to drive out to Hood River for a job and things like that? And anytime you can put work into a manufacturing facility, it just gets cheaper to have it built. Yes.
This may be an unfair question, but do you have any knowledge of what they're thinking about for the I-5? Are they looking at precast?
I do have knowledge. Actually, that's why I'm in town. We have a meeting tomorrow on the interstate bridge. And they are looking at all options, including big girders as some of the options, and trusses, and they really have the doors open on any and all options at this point in time. They're not as far advanced as you guys are.
I was just thinking that there's some synergy there. I happen to like this other option, to keep people off the river, put it in a controlled environment someplace. Your quality could go up compared to on the water. I get real concerned about the volume of concrete we're going to have to pour on this job over the water with trucks. that makes me a little nervous, even if you have a dedicated batch plant. Whereas if you do it off, precast someplace, you can control it better. But there ought to be some synergy there between the two projects. That there ought to be a win-win in there someplace.
There might be, I don't know how the timing would work out. But
We go first.
that's what it seems. They have a lot more hurdles to get over for that project than you guys do. And again, you guys are further advanced than they are at this point. But I agree with you. There could be some very good synergies there from a manufacturing facility. So for precast segmental, the schematic on the left is basically the same as what I showed for cast in place segmental. The only difference is on the right, it's shown a crane erecting a precast segment. And basically those segments get hoisted up there. You put an epoxy glue on the face. You align it with the previous segment and you post tension them together. That's about how complicated it is. Yeah, it really is. And there's keyways and stuff too, because when you build them in the casting yard, you match cast them. So they've already been cast together. You break them apart and then you go glue them back together. But once you get going, it's a very quick way of erection. I guess the other thing that concerns me about Hood River is you do get a little bit of wind here. And driving up here today was a good reminder of the wind. And that just makes it hard to be out on the water doing work. You're always fighting that wind and your barges are fighting it and your cranes can't always lift because they can't lift in certain winds. And so the more work you can take off the water, the better off you are.
And do you leave some comparison to time wise? You said it was faster to do precast than cast in place. Is there any kind of comparison out there on that?
You wish you had two identical jobs. One was cast in place and one was precast, and I don't. And the only comparison I have.
Production rate per day or something that you could compare?
Well, I'm sure there's stuff we could concoct up, but once you get going on precast, the superstructure goes faster than a cast in place. So you probably save some number of months. You don't save years. Yeah, your labor's being used someplace else.
That's true, but also if you're using precast, you've already calculated the weight. The weight that you're hanging on each side. You don't have to be as precise if you do the cantilever poured in place. Isn't that not true?
Well, even with
You
poured in place,
gotta be aware of it for sure.
even with cast in places, you've already calculated the weight too. You can get a little bit of variability just because unit weight of concrete can vary a little bit, but it's usually not that significant. So the modeling of the whole bridge erection and stuff is pretty much the same between precast and cast in place. And the survey and stuff is similar.
With the precast, is your pier table precasted or is that built in place?
It can be either way. We've had them both ways. I showed you a picture earlier of the tower cranes with all those pier tables. Those were cast in place pier tables for a precast structure. The other thing you sometimes see is precast columns, modular column sections that get erected and glued together and stressed together.
What does the clamp look like that holds those pieces while it's getting glued?
Well, there's a clamp on.
Just printed epoxy this weekend, so
There's a clamp on top of the segment, and it's got bars that normally you have PT bars that the segment's hanging from this clamp. You put the glue on the face, you bring it up to the existing concrete or previous segment, and then you put post-tensioning bars through that stress the new segment onto the previous segment. And that's, they are threaded bar, yes. Yeah, and so they're normally called temporary PT. So that pushes that glue together and squeezes it. Then you have to put in permanent PT, which is normally a strand system that goes all the way from one end of the cantilever to the other end of the cantilever. It'll go all the way through. And that stresses the whole thing together. There's a whole series of steps when you do all that.
The key thing here is it's been done.
Oh, yes. Yes,
So
it
here's
has.
my question. So the erect in place, how many years has that been a used technology?
The cast in place, well, we did our first one in the early 80s here in the United States. I think that was one of the first ones in the United States. And it had come from Europe. So probably 70 years. Or in the 70s, I guess. And precast segmental has similar longevity, probably not quite as long. I think it's probably 10 or 15 years younger. And again, a lot of it came from Europe. And then it took a while to come into the United States, but it gets used very commonly in the United States. So it's a common, it gets used in seismic zones and stuff. And segments can get very large. The Bay Bridge, our segments were up to 700 tons. Biggest segments ever in the world. So it's you can really erect quite impressive structures with precast. It'd be a challenge here because your three main spans get kind of long for precast. Not impossible, but they just get long, which means the segments get tall.
Can you speak a little bit to how much less intensive the work in the water would be with precast versus cast in place? Is there a discernible difference? And question to you guys who have been involved with this longer, how does that affect, or is that affected with our discussions with the tribes and with other environmental regulations? That's a big question, but maybe there's some snippets of answers that somebody can throw out.
Yeah, and I can kind of give you my gut check is I think with cast in place segmental, you're going to have 200 people working out there on the water. Precast, I think you'll get down to about 100. Okay. So if you got 100 less people out there for, I'll say 3 years, I mean, it's probably a rough idea of how many man hours you take off the water.
And what about amount of equipment in the water, one versus the other?
It'd be less with precast because you're not hauling all that rebar, all that concrete across the water. You still have to haul concrete out, but it's just much less. And from an environmental standpoint, hauling concrete on water is one of your riskier things. And really having any barge out there means you have to have tugs to manage that barge, which means you got issues with fuel leaks and other environmental stuff getting away from you and floating downstream or upstream. Work on the water is very expensive.
You have all those little tubes of epoxy.
I have a question about the tubes of epoxy. There's a seasonality component to this as well in terms of, setting concrete and things like that versus precast and cast in place. What are the limitations, or what should we be considering if we do something like a precast and we're looking at epoxy? Are the requirements of the epoxy environmentally similar to those of concrete, or are they different?
They are similar. Concreting, once you get down below 40 degrees, becomes problematic. Not impossible, it just gets more problematic. Mm-hmm. Epoxying down below 45 degrees, you start having to use special epoxies. So your limitations are probably pretty similar. So those months of January and February are going to be, I'll say, limited production, just because it's not terribly cold here, but it's cool. Mm-hmm. And you'll be fighting that weather issue.
We certainly have it a bit on both ends here, where we have a wind in the summer to contend with, and then once you get into the winter, the winds shift a bit, are generally a bit lighter, but you get the lower temperatures as well. So
yeah, we've built lots of structures in New York and Montreal and Chicago and colder environments than here. And you manage your way through it, and some days you don't work. So
I would also think that with the precast option, you've got less weight at any time hanging out there over the river than if you did a port in place with all the formwork and temporary work up there.
You would, because the bridge, once you start erecting the bridge with precast, it goes faster than cast in place. So which means you get to your closure ports quicker, get those cantilevers joined together, and you can erect a lot of bridge in 8 months. So there's a reason I'm a
running low on
consultant,
time.
not a contractor.
We're running a little low on time, so if we
Okay.
can let him keep going.
Site logistics are pretty similar. I'll say you'd have less manpower on the water with precast, which means you need less parking. You got less boats tramming people out there, and less outhouses out on the water and all sorts of stuff. You would need an offsite casting facility, which for truckable segments, I mean, it could be in Portland or something. It could be an existing precaster and use their facility and truck the segments up here. If you precast the main span, the 3 main spans, is you have to have access to water to get those segments onto a barge because they're too tall. Just some more pictures of site access stuff. Specialty equipment is pretty much the same between either cast in place or precast. Except you may, on the right-hand side here, it shows an overhead gantry being used for precast. That sort of gantry would work on many of your spans, but not the 3 main river spans. These gantries are commercially available by a firm out of Italy, and they're commonly used in the precast segmental industry. But they can only work up to about a 300-foot span. But they're a pretty slick way. You can truck the segments up to the back of the truck, that gantry. The gantry trolleys it out, puts it in place, you epoxy it and stuff. So it's a pretty slick system. Okay, and again, there's going to be other options probably thrown out to you guys as far as some girders, be it precast girders, steel girders. My suggestion is just leave the doors open as much as possible to let contractors be ingenious about what they want to do. And you'll get a better price and hopefully a better result.
In terms of cost for the over long-term cost and maintenance for cast in place versus precast, is there much of a difference?
Yeah, Michael might be able to answer that more than myself. My personal opinion, I think cast in place gives you a little bit better structure because it's kind of poured together. But I don't really have the evidence to prove that. I think a precast, if done right and a good overlay put over the top of it, you end up with a very good structure.
Yes.
So curious about structuring the RFP so that the contractors know that we're looking for some innovation. And are there things that would be triggers if you were looking at a proposal that would say, hey, there's another way to slice this one? Sorry.
I think I think you're gonna start having some contractor one-on-ones. And you'll start getting some input from them, although it'll be kind of muted because contractors don't want to share too much at this stage of a job. And so I think when you write the RFP is just don't make stuff too prescriptive. I mean, you may be at the point that you want drilled shaft foundations for these footings, and you can state that because odds are you're going to get that anyways. You could put right in there that you need these span lengths because of environmental permitting and stuff, but you're receptive to evaluating cast in place segmental, precast segmental, girder options, and see what they come back with.
So we're actually leaving everything very open, with the way we're proposing it. We're saying start with EC2, which was the cast in place, and tell us how you want to change it and tell us what the impacts for the project are for changing it, and leaving it up to them to tell us where and how they want to do things different. And then we'll evaluate that.
Yeah, I think what I've got in my head are the two Burlington Northern bridges that have gone in the last couple years here along the river, and just all the pre-work, everything was done off-site and then moved in, and it just kind of makes you, one day you're on the old bridge, the next day you're on the new bridge. How is there? I know ours is a little more complicated than that. I realize it, but
having worked on the the 66.4 and the 53.5 initially, I can tell you that those plans did not indicate what got built out there. And the contractor went to the railroad and said, would you be amenable to doing these things instead? And they were. So they were open to changing foundation types and looking at different options and working with the contractor and coming up with a way to do it. So I can tell you they weren't exactly done the way they originally thought they would be either. So, but they weren't written that way. It just happened to be a relationship thing there. So leaving it open is going to help that.
it's a level of trust with the owner and the contractor that lets that happen.
Drew and Lee, are you guys planning to come to the picnic so people can have one-on-one conversations with you after this? I'll buy you a beer. That'd be great. Okay, because we have people waiting on us and we're over schedule. I would just mention, we all know where the community events are coming up. If anybody can make the Huckleberry Fest or any of the others, our next meeting will be Monday, September 11th, 2023 from 2 to 4 here. And is there anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none, I was entertain a motion to adjourn. I forget I'm in Oregon. I'm sorry. With that, we are adjourned. Just so everybody remembers, follow someone else if you don't have the address, but it's